How many blessings have we walked right past without knowing? And what if one of them turned around and came looking for us, decades later? Good evening and welcome back to Wisdom by the Fireside. In tonight's live story, we follow a man who had no reason to expect more than the next day's work until a single envelope turned his life inside out. In its folds lay a mystery 38 years in the making, one that began with a boy, a stranger, and a bridge in the summer heat of 1987. He didn't remember that moment, but God never forgot. Greenville, South Carolina, March 2025. The rain had started before sunrise, soaking the cracked asphalt outside Myers Auto and Repair. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of oil and coffee, with the low hum of an old Coca-Cola fridge in the corner. Eddie Myers, 50 years old, sat at the counter flipping through last month's invoices. His fingers were stained with grease no matter how often he washed them. The shop was quiet. Too quiet. The metal flap of the mail slot clanged. A bundle of envelopes slid across the floor. Eddie barely looked up. Bills, advertisements, a flyer for a new BBQ joint. Then, one envelope caught his eye. It was heavier than the rest. Thick, cream-colored paper. His name printed in deep black ink. No return address. Just the emblem of a Charleston law firm. Curiosity gnawed. He tore it open, scanning quickly. The words were formal, but one line made him stop cold. You have been named the sole beneficiary in the last will and testament of Mr. Leonard H. Whitmore. Eddie read it again, slower. The name meant nothing. He didn't know any Leonard Whitmore. He had never fixed his car, never shared a beer, never once heard the name in 50 years of living. The letter said Mr. Whitmore had died in January, leaving behind an estate of considerable value. The law firm was handling the transfer. They requested Eddie's presence in Charleston at his earliest convenience. He pushed the letter back on the counter and let out a low whistle. "This has got to be a scam," he muttered. Eddie wasn't the type to believe in sudden windfalls. The last surprise he'd gotten was a blown transmission on his own truck. Still, something about the letter felt different. The paper was real. The phone number and address looked legit. No promises of millions for a small processing fee. But why him? That night, he sat in his one-bedroom apartment above the shop, watching the rain blur the streetlights outside. The letter lay on the table like it was waiting for him to make up his mind. Eddie had no wife, no kids, no one to call about it. If this was a scam, he'd waste a trip. If it wasn't, well, he didn't know what "if it wasn't" even meant. The next morning, he dialed the number. A calm female voice answered, "Whitmore and Ellison, attorneys at law." "This is Eddie Myers," he said cautiously. "I got a letter about a will. I think you might have the wrong guy." The woman introduced herself as Margaret Ellison, executor of the Whitmore estate. "Mr. Myers, there's no mistake," she said. "Mr. Whitmore was very specific in his wishes." Eddie frowned. "Ma'am, I never met the man." Margaret's voice softened. "He spoke of you. He left a personal letter explaining why. I believe you should read it in person." 2 days later, Eddie pulled his dented Ford F-150 into a street lined with manicured trees and brick sidewalks. The law office looked like it belonged in a movie. Mahogany doors, polished brass handles, the faint scent of leather inside. Margaret was in her 60s, silver hair in a neat twist. She led him to a quiet conference room and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This," she said, "is from Mr. Whitmore himself." Eddie opened it, expecting some legal jargon. But the first sentence made his heart stumble. "Eddie, you saved my life when you were just a boy. I doubt you even remember it. But I've remembered every day since." He stared at the handwriting, neat and steady. It was the summer of 1987, and I was standing on the edge of the Belmont Bridge. I had every reason to jump, and no reason to stay. Then, you came along, and with a few simple words, you gave me one. Eddie's mind went blank. "Belmont Bridge? 1987. He would have been 12. The letter ended. "God put you in my path that day, Eddie. You didn't just keep me from falling. You gave me years I would have thrown away. Now, I want to give you the years you deserve." Leonard. Eddie set it down, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. What had he said that day? And why couldn't he remember it? He didn't know it yet, but the answer would pull him back into a summer he thought he'd forgotten, and into a truth that would shake him to his core. Eddie left the law office with the letter tucked carefully inside his jacket pocket, as if a strong breeze might steal it away. The sky over Charleston was a pale blue, clouds drifting like slow ships. Tourists milled along King Street, taking photos of pastel storefronts. But Eddie saw none of it. His mind was stuck in the same loop. A bridge. The summer of '87, a man about to jump, and me. It felt impossible. How could he forget something like that? The drive back to Greenville was quiet except for the hum of the tires on the interstate. Every so often, he'd catch himself gripping the steering wheel a little too tight, as if he were bracing for something he couldn't name. By the time he pulled into the alley behind his shop, the sun had dipped low, painting the clouds gold. Eddie shut off the truck and sat there for a moment, staring at the rainwater pooled in the cracked pavement. He needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. The next morning, Eddie dialed his sister, June. She lived 2 counties over, running a small diner with her husband. Belmont Bridge? She repeated after he explained. Yeah, I remember it. You used to ride your bike out there in the summers. Why? Eddie hesitated. Do you remember anything about me talking to somebody there back in '87? There was a pause on the line. You really don't remember? No. June's voice softened. It was July, hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk. You came home later than usual, your shirt soaked through. Mom was hanging laundry and asked where you'd been. You just said, helping somebody, and went inside. Eddie frowned. Helping somebody how? I didn't know then, June said. But a few days later, I overheard some men at the bait shop talking. They said a guy, Leonard Whitmore, was seen walking away from Belmont Bridge, looking pale as a ghost. One of them swore a kid had been talking to him right before. Said the kid offered him a cold soda. I figured it was you. Eddie leaned back in his chair, the phone pressed tight to his ear. A soda? That was it? I don't remember, he admitted. Not the heat, not the bridge, not him. June chuckled sadly. You were 12, Eddie. Probably didn't think it mattered. But maybe it mattered to him more than you'll ever know. That night, Eddie sat in his apartment, the letter on the table beside a cup of coffee gone cold. He tried, really tried, to pull the memory up from wherever it was buried. And then, faintly, like a photograph fading into view, he saw it. A man in a wrinkled shirt, leaning over the railing, hands clutching the metal, staring down at the green-brown water below. Young Eddie, sweating under the summer sun, walking up without thinking twice, saying something about the heat, asking if the man wanted a soda from the corner store vending machine, and the man turning slowly, like someone waking from a dream. Eddie swallowed hard. The memory slipped again. But now, he knew it was real. He had spoken to Leonard Whitmore that day. He had pulled him, unknowingly, back from the edge. And then, like a pebble dropped into water, the ripples had carried across nearly 4 decades to land here, in his lap, in the form of an inheritance he couldn't have imagined. The next morning, Eddie called Margaret Ellison. I want to know more, he said. Margaret didn't hesitate. Then, you should see the house, she replied. 2 days later, Eddie was standing at the wrought iron gate of a sprawling property just outside Charleston. The Whitmore estate looked like something out of a magazine. Columns rising from the porch, live oaks draped in Spanish moss, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine. Inside, sunlight spilled across polished hardwood floors. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced men and elegant women looking down at him as he passed. Margaret led him into a study where a single photograph sat on the desk. It was a faded snapshot of Belmont Bridge, summer of 1987. And in the corner of the frame, small, almost out of focus, was a boy in a baseball cap, holding 2 glass bottles of soda. Eddie felt his breath catch. That's you, isn't it? Margaret asked quietly. He nodded slowly, the lump in his throat too thick for words. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the first breadcrumb. Leonard had left more than money behind. He had left a trail, one that would lead Eddie to a truth he wasn't ready for. The photograph wouldn't leave Eddie's mind. That grainy corner, his 12-year-old self holding 2 sodas, was like a window into a life he hadn't realized was still open. That night, he dreamed in sunlight and cicadas. When he woke, the details were sharper. July 1987. Greenville summers felt like they wrapped around you, thick, heavy, and humming with heat. The pavement shimmered in the sun, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. 12-year-old Eddie Myers rode his battered blue Schwinn down Main Street, a baseball cap pulled low to shield his eyes. His pockets clinked with coins, leftover change from mowing Mrs. Hanley's yard that morning. His plan was simple: ride to the corner store, grab a soda, maybe a pack of baseball cards, and head to the riverbank. But when he reached the turn for Belmont Bridge, something made him stop. The bridge stretched across the Reedy River, the metal guardrails scalding to the touch in the midday heat. Eddie wasn't sure why he slowed down until he saw the man. He was tall, maybe in his 30s, his shirt rumpled, hair damp with sweat. He stood with both hands gripping the rail, leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on the water far below. Even at 12, Eddie could feel it. The stillness wasn't right. He coasted closer, his bike tires crunching over loose gravel. "You okay, mister?" he called out. The man didn't turn, didn't move. Eddie swallowed, glancing toward the vending machine he knew was just down the block. "It's hot," he said, trying to sound casual. "Too hot to be out here without something cold to drink." Still no answer. But Eddie saw the man's shoulders shift, just slightly. "I'm gonna grab a soda," Eddie went on. "You should come. It's better in the shade by the store. And they've got the good kind, Coke in glass bottles." That finally made the man turn his head, slow, as if the motion hurt. His eyes were tired, red around the edges. "You're out here alone?" the man asked. Eddie nodded. "You too, but you don't have to be." It wasn't much, just words. But they seemed to land somewhere deep. The man's hands loosened on the rail. He stepped back, looking down at Eddie's bike, at the scuffed sneakers and dusty knees. "You really think they have Coke in glass?" he asked, almost a whisper. Eddie grinned. "Best in town." They walked together to the corner store. The man's pace was slow, as though he'd forgotten how to match steps with someone else. Inside, the air conditioning hit them like a wave. Eddie dropped coins into the machine, the clunk of bottles echoing in the small space. He handed one to the man, who hesitated before taking it. "Thanks, kid," the man said. "No problem," Eddie replied, twisting the cap off his own bottle. They stood there in the cool aisle, drinking in silence. Then, without a word, the man set his empty bottle on the counter and walked out. Eddie never saw him again. Back in 2025, Eddie sat alone in the Whitmore estate study, staring at the photograph until the lines blurred. It was the same man, Leonard Whitmore. He'd been standing on that bridge to end his life, and all Eddie had done was offer him a soda. Eddie closed his eyes. He had been 12, thinking only about the heat, the coins in his pocket, the next card in his baseball collection. He'd had no idea that God had used that moment, that ordinary, boyish kindness, to pull a man back from the edge. And now, Leonard had carried that moment for 38 years, long enough to leave everything he had, to the boy who'd once bought him a Coke. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "There's more, Mr. Myers." She handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a folded letter, a key, and a slip of paper with an address. "That's where he wanted you to go next," she said. Eddie looked from the key to the letter. It wasn't over. The will wasn't just a gift. It was a trail. And he was only at the first step. He didn't know it yet. But what waited at that address would make him question whether the encounter on the bridge had been chance, or something planned by a hand far greater than his own. The slip of paper in Eddie's hand bore a Charleston address, scrawled in neat block letters. Beneath it, a single line in Leonard's handwriting: "The first piece of the story is here." The brass key in the wooden box was old, its edges worn smooth, the teeth faintly tarnished. Eddie turned it over in his palm, feeling the cool weight of it. Margaret Ellison offered a faint smile. "He told me you might hesitate. Said you were the kind of man who likes to understand before he acts. But he also said, sometimes you have to walk into a door before you know what's on the other side." Eddie slipped the key into his pocket. "What's at the address?" "That," Margaret said, "is for you to find out." 2 hours later, Eddie pulled up in front of a small brick building, tucked between a seafood market and an antique shop. The windows were covered by white lace curtains, and a faded wooden sign above the door read, "Whitmore's Watch and Clock Repair." The shop looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust clung to the corners of the display windows. Inside, dozens of clocks lined the walls. Grandfather clocks, carriage clocks, cuckoo clocks, all frozen at different times. The air smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. A small counter sat at the back. On it, an envelope, addressed in the same careful handwriting, Eddie. He opened it and found another letter from Leonard. "Eddie, you gave me time when I had none left. It felt right to give you a place where time was kept, measured, and repaired. This shop was my refuge after that day on the bridge. I fixed clocks because I couldn't fix myself, at least not all at once. But God was patient, and so was time. This place is yours now. The records in the desk will explain how to transfer ownership. But the real reason I brought you here is in the drawer beneath. Leonard." Eddie's hands shook slightly as he knelt and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a small tin box. He lifted the lid and found a Polaroid photograph. It showed the front of the corner store in 1987, with two figures standing in the sunlight. One a man holding a glass soda bottle, the other a boy in a baseball cap with a crooked smile. Tucked behind the photo was another key, this one smaller and brass, with a tag. Locker 112, Charleston Union Station. Eddie sat back on his heels, staring at the tag. He had never been to the train station in Charleston. Whatever Leonard had locked away there had been waiting decades. That night, back at his apartment above the shop, Eddie laid the photograph on the table. He traced the faded image of his 12-year-old self. What did Leonard see in that moment that was worth carrying for nearly 40 years? And why leave these breadcrumbs now? It would have been simple to just hand over the estate and be done, but this felt intentional. He remembered Margaret's words. Sometimes you have to walk into a door before you know what's on the other side. And maybe, Eddie thought, that was what Leonard had done on the bridge, stepped away from one door and toward another. The next morning, Eddie drove back to Charleston Union Station. The building's high ceilings and iron beams spoke of another era. Travelers hurried past with suitcases, the sound of announcements echoing faintly above. Locker 112 was tucked in a far corner of the station, an old-style metal compartment with a keyhole. Eddie's hands were steady as he slid the brass key in and turned it. The lock clicked. Inside was a weathered leather satchel. The smell of old paper and leather rose as he unbuckled it. There were letters, dozens of them, each in an envelope marked only with a date. The earliest was July 10th, 1987. The latest, December 28th, 2024. At the top of the stack was a note in Leonard's hand. "These are the years you gave me." Eddie stood there for a long moment, the weight of the satchel heavy in his hands. The first envelope called to him. July 10th, 1987. The day on the bridge. As he slid the letter out, his breath caught. He didn't know it yet. But what he was about to read would not only tell him what happened that day from Leonard's side, it would show him how one soda on a summer afternoon had altered the course of countless lives, including his own. Eddie unfolded the letter marked July 10th, 1987. The paper was thin, the ink slightly faded, but the words were steady and deliberate, written by a man who wanted this moment remembered. "Eddie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you found the trail I left for you. I need you to know what that day was for me, because I doubt you ever guessed. That morning in July, I woke with no plan to see the sunset. I was 34 years old, and I had already decided the world was better off without me. I was drowning in debt from a failed business. My marriage had ended in shouting and slammed doors, and my father, God rest him, had passed 6 months before. I'd never felt so completely untethered. I walked to Belmont Bridge because it seemed far enough from anyone who might know me, and high enough to make it quick. I remember leaning on that railing, feeling the heat burn through my shirt, and staring at the river below. I was just trying to find the courage to let go." Eddie stopped reading for a moment, his throat tightening. The image was so vivid now. He could almost smell the hot metal of the railing, hear the cicadas buzzing in the thick summer air. He kept reading. Then I heard a voice. Small, casual, almost careless. A boy's voice. You asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. I thought if I ignored you, you'd keep going. But you didn't. You started talking about the heat, about how it was too hot to be out there alone. You said you were going to get a soda and that I should come along. I remember thinking, why is this kid bothering me? Doesn't he have somewhere else to be? But there was something in the way you said it. Something that didn't sound like pity. It sounded like an invitation. Like you were letting me borrow a little bit of your shade in that heat. Eddie's eyes blurred. He could still see that bottle of Coke in his 12-year-old hands, condensation beating down the glass. I followed you to the corner store because it was easier than staying on the bridge, easier than making the final choice. We didn't talk much, but standing there in the cool air, drinking that soda, I realized how long it had been since I'd stood beside another human being without feeling like a burden. You finished your drink and grinned like we'd just shared the best thing in the world, and then you left. You'll never know what you carried me away from that day, Eddie, until now. I went home. I didn't fix my life overnight, but I kept waking up, and each morning I'd think some kid thought I was worth a soda, and maybe that meant I was worth something after all. Eddie lowered the letter, staring at the station floor. The sounds of travelers blurred into a dull hum in his ears. The satchel of letters felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it contained. 38 years of life that wouldn't have existed without a moment he'd barely remembered. He flipped through the stack, noticing the years scrawled at the top of each envelope. 88, 89, 90. The paper aged as he moved forward, but the handwriting stayed firm. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind. He spoke of you. He put the satchel under his arm and walked back to the truck. Outside, the Charleston air was thick, the kind that made your shirt stick to your back. Eddie leaned on the hood for a moment, looking up at the sky. Lord, he whispered, I didn't know. I didn't know. He drove back to the Whitmore estate that evening, parking beneath the sprawling live oaks. Margaret was still in the study, sorting through documents. Find what you were looking for? She asked. Eddie set the satchel on the desk. Not yet. But I found where to start. Margaret's eyes softened. Then, you should keep going. Leonard wanted you to read them in order. He said they would explain everything. That night, Eddie sat in the quiet of the study, the only light coming from the brass desk lamp. He opened the next letter, February 12th, 1988, and began to read. He didn't know it yet, but each envelope would be another year, another piece of Leonard's life rebuilt. And somewhere in those pages was the reason Leonard had waited until 2025 to finally send the trail back to him. The next letter was dated February 12th, 1988. Eddie unfolded it slowly, the faint scent of aged paper rising, as if the years themselves had been sealed inside. Eddie, the first year after the bridge was the hardest. People think when someone chooses to stay, the clouds part and the world becomes bright again. It's not like that. You don't just step away from the edge and into joy. You walk into a fog, and you try to remember why you took that step at all. I took a job repairing watches at a little shop on King Street. I didn't know the first thing about it, but the owner, Mr. Cafferty, said, if you can keep steady hands and tell time, I can teach you the rest. He was patient, the way I imagine God is patient, letting the seconds tick forward until you realize you're still here. Every day I passed Belmont Bridge on my way to work, and every day I thought of you. Sometimes I wondered if you were real, or if I'd made you up to give myself a reason to climb down. But then I'd see a kid riding a bike, or drinking from a glass soda bottle, and I'd know you were real, and you'd said I didn't have to be alone that day. Eddie leaned back in the leather chair, the words hitting harder than he expected. He had never imagined that his 12-year-old voice could echo through someone's year like that. In October, Mr. Cafferty passed away suddenly. His daughter wanted nothing to do with the shop, so she offered it to me for a price I could never afford. I almost walked away. But that night, I dreamed I was standing on the bridge again. Only this time, you were there with a soda, saying, it's too hot to be out here without something cold to drink. When I woke, I thought, maybe God was telling me something. I called the daughter and asked if she'd consider payments over time. She agreed. I signed the papers the next week. That shop became my anchor. Fixing timepieces, measuring moments. It reminded me that every second I stayed was a second I could use. You gave me those seconds, Eddie. I wasn't going to waste them. Eddie set the letter down and rubbed his face. That clock shop, the one he had walked into just days ago, was more than a business. It had been the first structure Leonard built after stepping back from the brink. And the thought that a simple phrase from a boy could replay in a man's dreams months later, it unsettled him. In a good way. He reached for the next letter, July 10th, 1989. The 2-year mark. Eddie, I thought of you today. Not just because it's the anniversary of the bridge, but because a boy came into my shop, about your age when we met. He'd broken his father's pocket watch and thought he'd be in trouble. I told him to sit and watch while I fixed it. We didn't talk much, but I saw the relief in his eyes when I handed it back. And I realized, that's what you did for me. You didn't fix my whole life. You just fixed the next moment. And that was enough to keep me going to the one after that. I'm learning that maybe God doesn't hand us the whole map. Sometimes he just shows us the next step, and trusts we'll take it. Eddie sat there in the stillness of the study, the lamp casting warm light across the polished desk. He thought about the times he'd helped customers in his own shop. Someone stranded on the highway, someone desperate to get to work on time. He'd never considered that a moment of help could stay with someone for years. And now, Leonard's words made him wonder, how many people had been quietly carrying the weight of his kindness without him knowing? The satchel still held dozens more letters, each one another year of Leonard's life. But the question pressing hardest on Eddie now wasn't just why Leonard had left him the estate. It was why now. Why in 2025 after all these years? Somewhere in these pages was the answer. Eddie closed the study door behind him that night, the satchel slung over his shoulder. The moonlight through the oaks dappled the gravel path, and the warm Charleston air wrapped around him like a thick blanket. He didn't realize it, but this, walking away from the estate house under the moon, letters in hand, was his own bridge moment. Because once he finished reading them, there would be no going back. He didn't know it yet, but the later letters would reveal a twist that tied Leonard's fate, his fortune, and even his final days to a second act of kindness Eddie had long forgotten. Eddie poured himself a cup of coffee the next morning before settling into the Whitmore estate study again. The satchel sat where he'd left it, like it had been waiting for him overnight. He reached in and pulled out a letter marked March 3rd, 1992. The paper was newer than the first few, the ink darker, the handwriting steady. Eddie, by 1992, the shop was thriving. I'd paid off the debt to Mr. Cafferty's daughter, and even hired a young apprentice named Travis. He reminded me of you. Quick to smile, quick to offer help, without being asked. That year, a hurricane came through Charleston. The shop flooded halfway up the walls. Most of the clocks were ruined. I thought it was the end. But Travis showed up with buckets and a mop before the rain even stopped. He said, "We'll save what we can." We worked for 3 straight days. We salvaged enough inventory to keep the doors open. If I'd closed, I don't think I'd have had the strength to start over. I realized then, your soda saved me, but it also made me willing to accept help from others. If you'd let me walk away that day, I'd have drowned alone. Instead, you taught me that accepting a hand isn't weakness. It's proof you still want to live. Eddie sat back, letting the words settle. He could picture Leonard and Travis hauling ruined clocks out into the street, the air heavy with the smell of wet wood and oil. And all of it, Leonard's willingness to fight for that shop, had roots in a 12-year-old's invitation on a summer day. He reached for another envelope. August 15th, 1997. Eddie, I met someone this year. Her name was Elaine. I wouldn't have noticed her if not for the way she lingered at the shop window one Saturday. She said her late husband used to love clocks. We started talking. She told me she'd been lonely since he passed, and I told her I'd been lonely since before I could remember. We shared dinner, then another, then many more. I don't think I would have let her in if I hadn't let you in first, all those years ago. You cracked the door open on that bridge, and somehow, God kept pushing it wider. Elaine and I married last month. She fills the shop with flowers now. The smell of jasmine mixes with the smell of cedar. And for the first time in a long time, I think I'm happy. Eddie smiled faintly. He could almost smell it, the mingling of flowers and sawdust, like a shop that breathed both work and home. One more envelope caught his attention. September 12th, 2001. The date made his stomach tighten before he even opened it. Eddie, the world feels different tonight. I watched the towers fall on television and I thought of you. Not because you were there, but because you kept me from disappearing long before that day. Elaine and I opened the shop for anyone who needed a place to sit, to talk, to grieve. We poured coffee and listened. A man came in whose brother had been in the North Tower. I didn't know what to say, so I just let him talk. I think that's the lesson you taught me without knowing it. That sometimes the smallest kindness is the only thing that can keep a person upright in their darkest hour. I've kept that day on the bridge in my heart for 14 years now, Eddie. And every year, I try to give away what you gave me. Eddie let out a slow breath. The ripple wasn't just Leonard's life, it was everyone Leonard had touched because he'd been alive to do it. He set the letters aside and leaned back in the leather chair. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. He thought about how easy it would have been, at 12, to ride past the man on the bridge without a word. One choice, one sentence. And nearly 40 years of other people's stories had grown from it. But there were still more letters. Still the question of why now. Eddie reached for the next envelope, its date much closer to the present, October 14th, 2023. He didn't know it yet, but this letter would be the first sign that Leonard's final gift was not just gratitude. It was an unfinished mission, one Eddie would have to complete. Eddie slid the letter from its envelope. The date, October 14th, 2023, was less than 2 years ago. The handwriting was the same, but the ink strokes were slightly lighter, as if the pen had been set down and lifted more often. Eddie, I've been thinking about the bridge again. Not because I want to go back there, God willing, I never will, but because I've begun to feel that my time is running short. The doctors say my heart isn't what it used to be. I can hear the ticking louder now. Elaine passed away last winter. The house feels empty without her laughter. Some nights I catch myself listening for the soft creak of her chair by the window. I don't tell you this for pity. I tell you because I've been thinking about what to do with the time I have left. I don't have children. I have some distant relatives, but none close. And I keep asking myself, who would understand what I've tried to do with these years? Who would carry it on? The answer is you, Eddie. You once carried me without even knowing it. Now I want you to carry this. Eddie's fingers tightened on the page. Carry what? He read on, there's more to my life after the bridge than you can see in these letters. I've kept something, someone, in my care all these years. You don't know them yet, but when you do, you'll understand why I've left the estate in your hands. In my study, on the highest shelf, there's a small wooden frame with a photo of me and a young woman. On the back, I've written her name and address. She is the last ripple you created without knowing, and now she's yours to look after. Eddie looked up from the letter, heart thudding. A person? Someone Leonard had been caring for because of that day? Who could she be? Margaret Ellison found him still sitting in the study minutes later. You've read the 2023 letter, she said quietly, as if she knew exactly where he was in the stack. You knew about this woman? Eddie asked. Margaret nodded. Her name is Rachel Porter. She's 29. Leonard met her when she was 8. She was in a bad place. I think you should hear it from her. Eddie's brow furrowed. Why me? Why not one of Leonard's friends? Why not the state? Margaret hesitated. Because, Eddie, Leonard always said she existed because of you. The next afternoon, Eddie found himself driving 2 hours north to a small coastal town. The address led to a modest, clapboard house with a wide front porch and flower boxes under the windows. Rachel opened the door with a cautious smile. She had dark hair pulled back in a loose braid and eyes that seemed older than her age. You're Eddie, she said, almost like she'd been expecting him. Yeah. Leonard told you about me? Since I was a kid, she said. Come in. The living room was cozy, soft light, shelves lined with books, a quilt draped over the couch. A clock ticked steadily on the mantel. Eddie noticed it immediately. It was one of Leonard's repairs, the delicate brass hands gliding in perfect rhythm. Rachel poured tea, then sat across from him. "Leonard saved me," she said simply. "How?" "I was in foster care. My home life before that, wasn't good. I was quiet, angry. I skipped school a lot. One day when I was 8, I wandered into his shop because I liked the sound of the clocks. He gave me a little travel clock to take apart. Told me I could come back and work on it whenever I wanted. I started showing up every week. It was the first place I felt safe. He kept me out of trouble, helped me get into college. When I graduated, he gave me the deed to this house." Eddie felt the weight of her words. Leonard had been her bridge, just as Eddie had once been his. Rachel's eyes softened. "He told me about the soda, about how you didn't even know you'd saved him. He said if you could do that without trying, imagine what you'd do if you tried." Eddie looked around the little house, at the books, the clock, the warmth of it. He realized now, the estate wasn't just money or property, it was a responsibility. Leonard had built a chain of rescues, one life to the next. And now the chain had reached Eddie again. Rachel poured him another cup of tea. "Before he died, Leonard said you'd know what to do. I hope he was right." Eddie didn't answer right away. But in his chest, he felt it, the quiet, certain pull that had been with him since that day in 1987. He didn't know it yet, but there was still one more link in the chain, hidden in the last letter of the satchel. And it would demand more from Eddie than just kindness. Eddie stayed with Rachel for over an hour, listening as she told stories about Leonard that never made it into the letters. How he taught her to wind a grandfather clock without forcing the gears. How he kept a jar of peppermint candies on the counter because she hated the smell of metal shavings. How he always locked the shop door 5 minutes early on Christmas Eve so they could walk down King Street and see the lights together. Every memory had a quiet thread running through it. Leonard had made her feel wanted, seen, and safe. When he finally left her house, the late afternoon light painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. Eddie drove back to Greenville with the satchel of letters on the passenger seat, his mind replaying her words. Back in his apartment, he placed the satchel on the table and pulled out the very last envelope. The date stopped him cold. January 3rd, 2025, just 2 weeks before Leonard died. The handwriting was shakier now, but still unmistakably his. Eddie took a deep breath and unfolded the paper. "Eddie, if you're holding this, I'm gone. And I hope you've found Rachel. She is my joy, the proof that God doesn't waste a life once he's saved it. But there's something I never told her, and something I never told you. I went to Belmont Bridge twice in my life. The first time you were there, the second time I was there for someone else. It was the summer of 2004. I saw a young man leaning over the rail, same as I had all those years ago. His name was Aaron. He was 19. And this time, I used your words. It's too hot to be out here alone. Come get a soda." Aaron came with me. We sat in the corner store and I told him about the boy who once saved me without knowing. We stayed in touch. He turned his life around. Last year, Aaron called me. He was in trouble. Financial trouble, bad decisions. He was afraid he'd lose everything. I helped him as best I could, but I'm worried he'll go back to the bridge when I'm not here. That's where you come in." Eddie's hands tightened around the paper. "I've left Aaron's address in the bottom drawer of my desk at the estate. He doesn't know about you yet. But when you meet him, tell him the truth. Tell him where the words came from. This is my last request. Don't let the chain end with me. Someone once gave me a reason to stay. I've tried to pass it on. Now it's your turn. God bless you, Eddie. You gave me 38 years I wouldn't have had. Leonard." Eddie set the letter down slowly, staring at it as if it might shift under the lamplight. The chain wasn't just a metaphor. It was real. Eddie had saved Leonard. Leonard had saved Rachel and Aaron. And now, Aaron was his to save. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. He was a mechanic, not a guardian angel. What did he know about talking someone off a ledge, literally or figuratively? But then he remembered his 12-year-old self on that bridge. He hadn't known what to say then either. He'd just spoken what came naturally. It's too hot to be out here alone. Maybe that was the point. The next morning, Eddie drove back to Charleston to retrieve Aaron's address. Margaret didn't ask questions when he told her what he was looking for, just handed him the key to Leonard's study. The slip of paper was there in the bottom drawer, just like Leonard had said. Aaron Jacobs, 217 Willow Street, Columbia, South Carolina. Eddie sat in his truck with the address in his hand, the hum of traffic outside fading into the background. Somewhere in Columbia, a man he'd never met was teetering on his own kind of bridge, and Eddie had been given the chance, the responsibility, to be the one who showed up. He didn't know it yet, but meeting Aaron would not only test his ability to save someone else, it would force him to confront a truth about his own life he'd been avoiding for decades. Columbia, South Carolina, late morning. Eddie pulled his truck up to 217 Willow Street, a narrow duplex with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. The neighborhood was quiet except for the faint hum of a lawnmower a few blocks away. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. This wasn't like delivering a part or fixing a car. This was stepping into a stranger's storm. Finally, he got out and walked up the cracked concrete path. Aaron Jacobs opened the door after the second knock. He was in his late 30s, lean with hollow eyes and a week's worth of stubble. A faint smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke drifted out into the morning air. "You, Eddie?" he asked, voice wary. "Yeah," Eddie said. "Leonard Whitmore was a friend of mine. He asked me to check in on you." Aaron's jaw tightened at the name. "He's gone, isn't he?" Eddie nodded. "Couple months now." Aaron stepped back. "Guess you better come in." Inside, the place was dim. A thin curtain hung over the window, letting in just enough light to see stacks of unopened mail on the counter. The coffee table was littered with overdue bills, empty mugs, and a single photograph of Leonard with his arm around a much younger Aaron. Eddie gestured to the photo. "That's from the shop?" Aaron gave a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, back when I was a punk kid who thought I had it all figured out. Leonard, he talked me down when I was about to do something stupid. Sat me down in a corner store and told me about some kid who once did the same for him." Eddie's chest tightened. "That kid was me." Aaron looked up, blinking. "You?" Eddie nodded. "Summer of '87, Belmont Bridge. I didn't even know what I'd done until Leonard told me years later." Aaron sat back on the couch, staring at him. "So, you're the start of all this?" Eddie shrugged. "Guess so. But Leonard didn't bring me here just to talk about the past. He was worried about you." Aaron's eyes flicked to the stack of bills. "Yeah, well, things aren't great. Lost my job 6 months ago. Drinking too much. Got this notice last week." He picked up an envelope and tossed it onto the table. "They're gonna take the place if I don't pay up." Eddie didn't rush in with advice. He remembered Leonard's letters, how sometimes the best thing you can do is just stand beside someone in their fog. "Tell me about the bridge," Eddie said quietly. Aaron's shoulders slumped. 2004, I was 19, got into trouble, money I couldn't pay back, people I shouldn't have messed with. Thought it'd be easier to just step off. And then Leonard showed up. I don't even know why he was there that day. He just said, "It's too hot to be out here alone. Come get a soda." Eddie smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's what I said to him." Aaron gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "Guess we've all been passing the same soda around, huh?" "Something like that," Eddie said. "Leonard wanted you to know, you're not done. Not if you're still here." Aaron's gaze dropped to the floor. "What if I don't have anything left worth doing?" Eddie leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Neither did Leonard that day in '87. He thought his story was over. But 38 years later, he'd helped more people than he could count, including you. You don't have to see the whole road right now, just the next step. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the tick of a small wall clock. Aaron looked at the photograph again. He really believed that, huh? That one small thing could turn everything around? Eddie nodded. He lived it. So have I. And now, maybe it's your turn. Aaron didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But he reached for a trash bag and started gathering the empty bottles on the coffee table. It wasn't much, but it was a step. Eddie stood, slipping a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "My number's on here. You ever feel like going back to that bridge?" Call me first, day or night. Aaron took it, staring at it like it might vanish. On his way out, Eddie paused at the door. Oh, and when it gets too hot to be out there alone, go get a soda. Aaron gave a faint smile. Yeah, I think I will. As Eddie walked back to his truck, the winter sun breaking through the clouds, he felt it. That same quiet pull he'd felt on the bridge at 12 years old. Only now, he understood. The chain wasn't just about saving someone's life. It was about showing them they could save someone else's. He didn't know it yet, but Aaron would make his own bridge moment in the years to come, and the chain would keep growing long after Eddie was gone. Eddie drove back to Greenville with the January chill creeping through the truck's windows, but inside, he felt a quiet warmth. He didn't know if Aaron would call. He didn't know if the man would really turn things around. But as the highway miles slid under his tires, Eddie realized something Leonard had been trying to tell him in every letter. Your job isn't to control the outcome. It's just to show up when you're called. Back at the shop, he unlocked the door and stepped into the familiar smell of motor oil and dust. The sound of the old Coca-Cola fridge hummed in the corner, like it had been waiting to greet him. On impulse, he dug a few coins from his pocket, dropped them into the slot, and pulled out a cold glass bottle. The pop of the cap was sharp in the quiet. He took a sip and smiled. Leonard had been right. There was something about a Coke in glass that made it taste like a promise. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with the satchel of letters. He reread the earliest ones, tracing the arc from a man on a bridge to a man with a shop, a wife, a surrogate daughter, and a legacy. And then he thought of the chain. 1987. A 12-year-old boy with a soda saves Leonard. 2004. Leonard uses the same words to save Aaron. Now, in 2025, Eddie sits across from Aaron, offering him the same lifeline. It was like a river of mercy, flowing through time, carrying each person just far enough to pass it to the next. He found himself wondering, had God been standing on the bridge that day too, watching a boy ride up on a bike, smiling because he knew what that moment would ripple into? The thought made Eddie's chest ache in the best way. The next day, he drove back to Charleston one last time to see Rachel. She greeted him with the same warm smile, ushering him inside, where the scent of coffee filled the air. He told her about Aaron, about Leonard's last letter, about the chain. Rachel listened, eyes shining. Leonard used to tell me that kindness is like a clock spring. Once you wind it, it keeps turning long after you're gone. Eddie chuckled softly. Sounds like him. Rachel set 2 mugs on the table and leaned in. You know what this means, right? The chain doesn't stop with you either. At some point, someone's going to walk into your shop, or meet you on the side of the road, or sit beside you somewhere, and you're going to be their bridge. Eddie nodded slowly. I think I've been theirs already. I just didn't realize it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the clock on the mantel ticking steadily. Then Rachel said, Leonard used to tell me the hardest part wasn't saving someone else. It was letting yourself believe you were worth saving too. Eddie met her gaze. For the first time in decades, he realized he did believe it. That night, back in Greenville, Eddie closed the shop early. He took the satchel of letters and placed it on a shelf in his small office, beside a framed photo of Leonard. No glass case, no do not touch sign. Just there, waiting for the next set of hands. As he locked up, the winter air bit at his cheeks. He took a long breath, looked up at the dark sky and whispered, All right, Lord. Send me where you need me. He didn't know it yet, but the next bridge moment was already on its way, carried quietly toward him in the current of someone else's desperate day. It was a week later when the phone rang just after midnight. Eddie almost didn't answer. Calls at that hour rarely meant good news. But when he saw the number, he picked up immediately. Aaron! The voice on the other end was tight. Yeah, I was driving past Belmont Bridge, pulled over. Don't even know why, just needed to hear another voice. Eddie grabbed his coat without thinking. Stay where you are. I'm on my way. The bridge was just as he remembered it. Long, steel, humming faintly under the tires of passing cars. The night air was sharp, smelling faintly of the river below. Aaron stood near the railing, hands buried in his pockets. He looked up as Eddie approached. It's cold, Eddie said. Too cold to be out here alone. Aaron gave a faint, tired laugh. Guess the line works in winter, too. Come on, Eddie said, gesturing toward his truck. I know a diner that's open all night. Coffee's nothing special, but they've got the good pie. They sat in a corner booth, the hum of the coffee machine filling the silence. Neither man rushed to fill it. Sometimes, Eddie realized, the space between words is where the real rescue happens. Finally, Aaron said, I don't know why I called you. Eddie shrugged. Maybe you weren't calling me. Maybe you were calling for the person who once called for Leonard, and he's just making sure the line's still open. Aaron looked down at his coffee, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, maybe. When Eddie drove home that night, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror, he knew he'd just lived his own bridge moment again. Not on a hot July afternoon, not with a glass bottle of Coke, but in the middle of a cold winter night with a man who just needed someone to stand beside him. In the weeks that followed, Eddie saw Aaron more often. At the shop, over coffee, sometimes just walking the quiet streets. They didn't talk much about the hard nights, but Eddie could see the fog lifting piece by piece. And one evening, as they locked up the shop together, Aaron said, You know, maybe I'll be the one to buy the next soda. Eddie grinned. I think Leonard would like that. As I sit here tonight telling you this story, I keep thinking about that chain. Eddie to Leonard, Leonard to Aaron, and now Aaron to whoever comes next. Maybe you've been the one on the bridge. Maybe you've been the one with the soda. And maybe, one day, you'll be both. We don't always know when we're standing in someone's rescue. We don't always see the ripples. But they're there, spreading out in ways only God can track. So I'll leave you with this. Who in your life needs you to step onto the bridge beside them? What small kindness could become the turning point in their story? And will you recognize a blessing when it arrives late? Thank you for sitting with me tonight, part of our little circle here by the fire. If the story touched your heart, share it to the ones you love. And if you would like to listen to more like it, you know where to find us.